Said I volunteered to take him to bed this night. We get to the bottom of the stairs and he stops, and he won't go. I coax him up a few more steps. We get about 3/4 of the way up the stairs, and he stops completely terrified. It was so abrupt, and he looked so scared. I said, "What's wrong?" He says, "We have to wait. We have to wait for the lady to let us pass." I was instantly shook. After a few moments, he turned to me and said, "Okay." She said, "We can pass. She likes you." At this point, my heart is literally in my throat. I take him up to bed, and I tuck him in. I get him all cozy, and then I don't even go back down the stairs to my bed, or to the living room. I just go straight to bed. The next morning, at breakfast, I'm telling my mom what happened. She turns instantly white, cigarette white. Oh, I like that. I like that. Cigarette white, that's really white. Good one, HP. Anyway, she then proceeds to tell me that the only reason we bought this particular house was because it was the only one we could afford. And the reason this house was so cheap was that 6 months before we moved in, a woman hung herself from the the banister of the stairs. It's safe to say that I never walked up or down those stairs that night alone ever again. I was up in bed before the sun went down. Luckily, we moved shortly after. Well, thanks, HB. That was another good story. Yeah, those ghost ones get me. You know, I wouldn't mind seeing like a Sasquatch or some other cryptid, but the thought of a ghost, it's scary. You know what was the movie? Dang it, I'm not going to be able to think of it now. It was the one where they had cameras set up in the house, and the guy put flour on the floor. Of course, I'm doing the show alone, so I don't have anyone to tell me. So I'm just going to skip it. I'll come back to it if I think of it. Yeah. So that was a scary one. Also emailed to me at eerieskiesromanceandmonsters@gmail.com. Send your stories in. The more I get, the more shows I can make, and the longer they can be. The next story I'm going to tell is a famous Sasquatch story. It's the story of Albert Ostman. We all know it. He was kidnapped, or supposedly kidnapped. So Albert was a Canadian prospector. He lived from around 1893 to 1975. And he claimed he was abducted by a family of Sasquatch and held captive for 6 days. On an evening in 1924 near Toba Inlet, British Columbia, Albert was sleeping. The problem with that was he hadn't meant to be sleeping. On this night, he was meant to stay awake, because for 3 nights leading up to that night, someone or something was visiting his camp, and he wanted to catch them in the act. But as he dozed in his sleeping bag, suddenly he was picked up and carried off. Now awake, still in his sleeping bag with his rifle, a few supplies in there with him, he is hauled off over a shoulder for 3 hours, up, down, after which he's thrown down and greeted by a family of, get this, 4 Sasquatch, one of which, an adult male, was over 8 feet tall. Albert said this of his initial encounter: "They looked like a family, old man, old lady, and 2 young ones, a boy and a girl. The boy and girl seemed to be scared of me. The old lady didn't seem too pleased about what the old man had dragged home, but the old man was waving his arms and telling them all what he had in mind. And they all left me then. It did seem like they had a language." Now Albert had his gun on him, which he kept close at hand, but because the Sasquatch made no move to harm him, he chose not to use it. While in captivity, he was fed. sweet-tasting grasses, roots, which were all washed, stacked, and given to him by the adult female. Albert made many detailed observations which he later recounted, including his efforts to befriend the young male, in order to get the larger male interested in the snuff he had on his person. See, Albert brought a can of snuff. He happened to have it with him. And he had this plan in his mind that if he could get the adult male to eat the box of snuff, he could get the chance to kill him and escape. Crazy, I know, but who knows what would go through your mind, right? In his account, Albert also noted of a briefly entertained idea to take the young female with him whenever he finally got away, though he ultimately decided against it. Yeah, I think there might be something more to that part of it. I'm not sure why Albert would want to take the female back with him. I feel like there was more that he left out of that story. He was there for 6 nights. And at one point he did say he thought the big male's intention was for him to breed with the young female. After 6 days, possibly because he suspected he was about to be used for breeding purposes, like I just said, though this is merely speculation, Albert finally made his escape. He was somewhat successfully able to carry out his plan with the snuff, which ended up making the adult male Sasquatch groggy enough that he was able to run away. After escaping, Albert came upon a logger. Naturally, he didn't mention the family of Sasquatch or being held captive because he in fear of sounding crazy. Instead, he told him that he was a prospector and he was lost. That is really a fantastic story, and I want to believe it. And there's a lot of people who doubt it. A lot of people doubt it because he didn't come forward until 1957, decades after it happened. In his defense, he says that's because there was no stories about Sasquatch before it happened. And once they started coming out, he felt safe to tell it. Yeah. But for all the people that don't believe it, he had his believers too. Famous writer John Green, he interviewed Albert while he was still alive, and he said he believed the story holds up. He said it's because the story was told in 1957. It has an air of truthfulness that it would not have if someone told the same story today, in Green's words given in a 2003 statement. Regardless, it is a great story. I, for one, believe they're out there. There's just too many sightings and too many footprints. Did Albert get kidnapped by a group of Sasquatch? I think so. Yep, I do. I think he did. I believe he was. I think that's all for tonight. Like I said, if I get 10 listens, I will do another show, and the next one will be longer. So, good night, guys, and enjoy your week, and enjoy your romance and your monsters. Remember, send your stories to eerieskyromanceandmonsters@gmail.com. Later.